could raise your hand if you want to tell us kind of any sort of experiences you've had with top facilitation in the recent past. Just give us a kind of a snapshot of what you've been up to and where you've kind of dipped your toe in or where you've taken a big swim relative to top facilitation, whether it's action planning or anything else. We'd just like to get a sense of, those of you on the call, what you're up to. So, Laura, you're going to have to tell me if anybody has their hand raised.
So far, we have no willing souls.
Oh.
They're very shy today. Oh,
yeah.
Now we have Julia. Julia has her hand raised.
Great.
She's a
Julia,
brave
go
one.
ahead. Tell us what you're up to.
So, right now, for the state of Florida, what we're in is our SHA and SHIP processes.
Yeah.
So during this time, I've been able to actually use the skills I learned in top facilitation to assist in the SHA process. One thing that comes to mind is facilitating the health status assessment group, the work group, which tends to be a group of epidemiologists here at the Department of Health, but in that we also have used those same skills, not just me, but also Daphne Holden, who's also taking the top facilitation training. We've been able to utilize those skills in facilitating meetings with our partners and also with preparing for meetings to carry out the state health assessment. So I would say that definitely our training has come in handy, and it's something that we use very often. So that's where we are here at the central office in planning.
Great.
So.
Terrific. Thank you. Wow, that's very, very impressive. Good. Anything else? Okay.
No other hands are raised.
Okay, great. All righty. So I'm sure that most of you dream in a focused conversation format. Actually, you know what? I woke up this morning doing a focused conversation. I was dreaming about, you know, a really, isn't that funny? A really bad meeting, and it was inside a tent, and it was all over the place. And I finally raised my hand and said, "May I please facilitate this?" And I stepped up and made everybody get in a circle, and I woke up trying to think of what the R-level question was, and I said, "Oh, for heaven's sakes, it's time to get up. Stop." So it happens. It happens. When you start, it's kind of like when you start dreaming in another language, you know that you're there. All right, so let's get going then. Move on to the agenda. Oh, well, the agenda, as I said earlier, is we're going to review action planning, kind of do a reminder of the 8 parts of action planning, and then kind of open it up and see if there's anything in terms of your experiences that you would like to talk about, some help with, some design work. So, all right. So what's the common sense behind top action planning? And you'll remember that often action planning is used when you're talking about planning an event or a project or campaign that is 6 months out, 6 months to a year out. It can be less. It just means you need to get going. You've got a lot of work to do if it's in less than 6 months. That's all. But you can launch action planning by imagining the end first, and therefore clarifying the direction from day 1 through to the day after. There's a whole process of aligning resources with the planning process and being clear about if you break it down into the pieces and the parts, and you're attaching resources to each of those parts, you can get that all organized, and as well as people resources. Very much about designating the leadership roles for all the different task groups and the overall process. And just as you may remember or you may have experienced, the process of putting it together it's a kind of a fun and kind of big iterative process, and in that process you build a lot of team trust and support, because everybody kind of has a sense of what everybody else is doing and kind of what they're to be held accountable to. So it's a great process for that. Okay, so we're going to break this into two parts. There's part one of action planning, which I am going to turn over to Deb to go over with you.
All right. Well, as Nancy said, it is in two parts, two big chunks. Part one is really scoping out the plan itself. How big a thing is this? What are some of the elements that we want to remember? What is it that we really are talking about and all can commit to making happen? So it's just sort of drawing that picture of the bottom line. And part two, you get into the actual weeds of the plan itself, generating key actions, calendaring it out, coordinating those pieces to make sure that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, and then time to stand back and say, look what we did, and is there anything we forgot? So really part one is about the what, and part two is about the how. Before I jump into some of those pieces in part one, I would like to ask if there's any preliminary questions that you were walking into this webinar with that you would like us to make sure that we answer during these next couple of sections. If you would raise your hand if you have a specific question that you want addressed before we're done.
I don't see any hand raised yet, Deb.
Okie doke. Well, then we're just going to jump right into it, Lori. As I said, part one is the core agreements, the what of it all. And it exists in four parts. The context, meaning what are the givens about this that we already know to be true. And then, as Nancy said earlier, imagining success before it happens, seeing the end in mind before you even begin. Moving back then to the current reality, what's our capacity to actually create that victory? And then, based on our conversation, what are we really going to do? What can we commit to having happen? So if we were to dive into the context itself, what we have here is actually a case story of one group that did action planning. They were the Maple Grove Parks and Recreation Department, and they had a project called Discover Hometown Health. So we asked the question in the beginning, what do we know to be true about this particular project? And they brainstormed all the things that at a 30,000-foot view they could agree on were the givens of the project. It had been named, they've already had the kickoff, everybody's really already busy, and et cetera, right on down the list. So context is just that quick scan of what we know to be true. And then we jump to the future. And usually you imagine the day after completion of the project and take a look around. This is where it's sometimes helpful to draw on those objective level sensory prompts. You know, it's a day after or a week later, and we're talking about the incredible success that we had with the implementation of this project, and what did we see, and what did we hear, and what was going on, what were some of the activities. And so the individual brainstorm first if you want to do it, and then group brainstorm is just capturing all of those images that made it such a success. What do you notice about this particular picture on the screen? Anybody willing to raise your hand and tell me what you see?
Sam.
See short, concise statements.
Uh-huh. Yep. Anything else? If you're doing this on a flip chart, it's helpful to have different colors because it just makes it easier to see. And this should be a very quick process so that you, as you said, Sam, short statements are helpful and just capture them as quickly as you can. And so if you can get a scribe to help you do that, it sometimes speeds things along. One key to imagining the victory is keep them very focused on the positive. A lot of times you may have a Debbie Downer who will throw in, oh, but gosh, wasn't it awful when the tornado came? No, we're not talking about anything that could go wrong. This is just imagining the most fabulous, wonderful thing that could ever happen because you want to stretch the imaginations here. So any questions on doing the victory? And then we come back to reality. Imagining that victory then, the question becomes, what is our capacity to make that victory happen? And you internally think about the strengths and the weaknesses of the team itself to make that victory happen. And then externally, what would be the benefits if we actually did? And what might be the dangers of success, those unintended consequences that could happen if we actually pull off that victory. And so weaknesses are focused on the team and benefits and dangers are focused on the success, the victory itself. While it may look like a SWOT, it's not really because it's totally focused on that picture that we drew earlier in our victory. Any questions on current reality? Has anyone actually given action planning a try so far? Anybody had any experience with it? Okay, good. Then this is a good review. So this is an all-important step in the whole process, but particularly in this first part, because it's all been leading up to now. And what you try to do is find out, okay, what are our core agreements around this project? As I said before, you're really scoping it out. You're not planning it. You're not generating key actions yet. It's just what are the outcomes we are after? And those outcomes could be very concrete, like we're after 100 people to come to this party. Or they could be qualitative in the sense that we are after a motivating event that spurs commitment to our future. It could be anything all over the board, but anything that everyone is committed to making happen. So this is the consensus piece. And there are lots of ways that you can get to that point and lots of questions you want to ask. You may want to say, what do we hear ourselves saying are must-haves in this effort? Or what do we all agree must be part of this if it's going to be successful? What are the core agreements that we can all put our name to? Some people actually sign the commitment poster. It's sort of a step, a flag in the sand to say, yep, I'm there and I'm ready to start planning now. So, what questions do you have about part one, if any? All right. Well, Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you to review part two.
Great, good. And I just wanted to say I find coming up with the commitment statements often is hard for a group, partly because one of the things you're doing is reaching consensus. So one little tactic to get there is to go back and read through the victory and kind of run it through the screen of the current reality and get people to focus back at what they said was kind of their success, and then juxtapose that to what can you really pull off once you look at your current reality. And that way it helps the group focus in on what you're trying to accomplish at the commitment step of the action planning.
And Nancy, if I could add also that one technique I have seen used very effectively is if when you go back and you read out the victory circle, have your scribe read it out perhaps, and ask the group, so what are the 3 things you see right here that you'd really love to actually be a part of this? Underline them or circle them. In the current reality, do the same thing and have them reread, when they reread, the strengths. Have them underline or circle. So what are our greatest assets as a team? Going through all 4 quadrants, and it really maybe helps to focus the group on those things that bubble to the top. I'm complete.
Yes, and I'll add one other little process that I've heard about being done. I've never actually seen it. Is in the commitment phase, have, especially if it's a larger group, have everybody write down one commitment on a half sheet, one commitment that they really see as really important. Collect those half sheets, put it on the wall, and do a kind of a rapid fire clustering to see what emerges, and get them to name the kind of summary commitments from those half sheets. So it's just a way to structure it a little bit more to get the data up on the wall. And take the pulse of the entire room versus just the voices who are brave enough to speak up and name a commitment. So.
And we have a question, Nancy, too.
Yes. Terrific.
Yeah.
Hi, this is
Lopez
Jimena from Miami-Dade.
Great.
Okay. I was wondering, how specific would you make your commitment statements? Would they be general or would they be very specific?
Good question. I'll answer the question first since I'm the last one to talk, but I welcome Deb to speak up as well. It really depends what the statement is. As Deb said, it can be very specific. Is to say, you know, our commitment is to have the entire class attend, and that is 57 people. So that's pretty specific, because that makes sense in the context of whatever it was that was being planned. More typically, the commitment is we're committed to reaching out to everyone and getting as many to attend as we can possibly generate. So again, it's kind of the lawyer's answer. It can be either. Really, what's most important is it speaks to what you're planning, and what it isn't is the tactical actions that you know are going to follow in the second part of action planning. It's not about what you're going to do or how you're going to do it. It's what do you want to have in place at the end when you're imagining the event itself. Deb, do you have another way to say that, or different opinion?
I think you said it very well. I think it really does all matter on the context, and the really important thing about the commitment are a couple of things, I would say. Number one, that everybody agrees to it, because these are the big chunks. These are the pieces that we will all work toward. Even if we only have a small part of that, we're all heading toward this outcome. The other thing, so that's really sort of the rational aim of the commitment. Here's what we're after. The experiential aim of commitment is we are solidly together on making this happen. And you get that bone deep commitment for folks. I'm willing to put in my time to make this happen. So whether or not it's big or small, as long as those two pieces are in place, I think you'll have a winning combination. I'm complete.
Great. Okay, so part two. Part two is the, as Deb said earlier, it's the how. It's how are we going to, actually if you can go back one, Laurie, that'd be great. It has these kind of 4 major components to it. There's the key action brainstorm, which is a consensus workshop. There is the calendaring part of it. It's putting those actions, fleshing them out a little bit more and putting them onto the calendar. Then there's this stepping back and looking at the calendar and coordinating it and realigning and taking stock of the resources that were put up there and assigning leadership. And then the last is the resolve. It's kind of bringing it to closure, giving it an image, and discussing, how do we go forward from this point to when the event or the plan is actually going to happen. So 4 major steps. Lots of pieces and parts, but 4 major steps. So the first piece of phase 2 is the key action. We call it a brainstorm here. And you are brainstorming the actions on half sheets, and that will accomplish the commitments that you have just generated. You get all those actions up onto the wall, and you do essentially a consensus workshop. And you'll probably remember the key difference in this one is that it isn't about quantity, it is about getting the key actions up there without a lot of repetition. So if somebody has back at their table has an action that's just the same, they don't need to bring it up. What you want to do is get all the actions out there, the broadest set of actions that's going to pull off the project. And then you cluster the key actions by task team or committee or work group, whatever word you want to give your groups, but it's organized by work team. Oh, here's another one, work team, teamwork. So the plan emerges in those small groups because as you move to the next part of it, those small groups, which in the training and often in reality as well, we have people sign up for the small groups by kind of where they have energy or expertise, and basically where do they want to go. So each of those small groups takes the actions that were generated in the task team, if you want to move to the next slide, and they talk about several aspects of those tasks that were, the actions that were laid out. They start by naming in our task team work, whatever that was named, what is the victory? When we're done with our work as a task team, what will we have accomplished? What will success look like? And you can put it on a blue card. Then you step back and say, what's the very first thing we need to do to get going in this group, in this work group, so that you know that we'll actually take that first launch step and get going, and that's on your pink card. Then you lay out the cards across the calendar, and you might eliminate some. You may need to add in a step or two, an action or two that was missing. So you talk all that through, and you lay it out. And then at the very end, you say, okay, so if this is what we're all about, what's the budget and what's the resource considerations that we need, and so what are we going to identify as our cost in the overall project, and then of course who's going to be our lead, our coordinator. So you give the instructions to the groups to do all that, and then you put it on a calendar. Next slide. Oh yeah, well here's the while the group's doing that, you prepare the calendar, or you might have it prepared ahead of time, would be my suggestion, and you put it up on the wall. So when the group, each team comes up, they have their swim lane for their calendar, and they put it across. Maybe we can see the next slide. Hopefully it's a calendar. There it is. So each team puts their calendar on the wall. And reports back starting with the victory. And it's just really important to do that. So, as you know, it's when you hear report outs, you can kind of get lost in the details. But if you put a really strong emphasis on this is my team, and sometimes you have them rename their team so it has a little more energy and it's fun and it's memorable. But this is my team and this is what we're going to accomplish. So just like back in the beginning we started with the end in mind, the task teams do the same thing. They start with their end in mind by having their victory read out first, and then they go
Nancy?
back. Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Jimena has a hand raised, and I think I saw somebody else's as well at one point.
Great. Well, I'll stop then.
I apologize. I forgot to put it down. That's Jimena.
Okay.
Put mine down. Sorry.
No, that's quite right.
Was there someone else who had a question as well? Well, all righty then. Carry on, Nancy.
So I will just blather on. So let's see, start with the end in mind, and then each team reads across the cards and explains their work. So I will stop at this point and see, is there any, I'm wondering, I would love a kind of a check-in for those who have remember back to the training and when we modeled action planning, or if you've been part of action planning or you've facilitated action planning. If you could speak to your experience in doing this part of action planning from phase 2, so the consensus workshop, getting the teams organized and doing their nitty-gritty work and getting it up on the wall. Any memories about your experience with that or more recent experiences? Go ahead and raise your hand.
Jennifer?
Jennifer?
Yes, I've used action planning several times and had wonderful outcomes every time that I've used it. And this part of it, some of the memories that I have in using it with youth audiences, sometimes they you know, got a little bit like down in the details, or just had such big dreams that we had to set realistic goals and tasks for ourselves. And but really they loved it. They loved the visual and the hands-on aspect of doing it this way. And then I've used it also with adult teams, professional staff at the Department of Health. And we always enjoyed turning that sticky wall version into an Excel spreadsheet and putting it on a SharePoint where everybody had access to it and all of the different teams could update pieces as they went along. So those are some of the memories.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I've experienced doing action planning with young people as well, and this part was really helpful because it did bring it back to reality in terms of the amount of work that needed to be done to reach those victories. And in the next phase, which I'll talk about right now, which is the coordination phase, this is the time to do that. There's the reports. It's the time to really take a check and ask those questions which are really about, some of them are about capacity. So do we have the budget to do this? How will it be coordinated? Who's taking leadership? Do the victories reflect our commitment? And that's a really big and important question to ask, to go back and read through the victories and say, okay, does it reflect our commitment? Are we leaving anything out? You know, are we missing the mark? What's missing? Or have we overextended ourselves here? So it's a really good reality check before people go out the door and go kind of rushing off to do their part, and then kind of back home they're not able to pull it off. So it's a great cross check of that. And then of course the question next is next steps. So in looking at the next steps, it's the resolve part of action planning, and one fun way to do it is to have them draw a symbol, or depending on the event, you can sometimes name the event at this point, and that becomes essentially the logo or the name or the kind of the culminating visual that pulls it all together. And And often at this point, you can, there are some insights that are generated by doing this imagery and talking about, of course, then talking about next steps, which is an important piece. And often the next step is that leadership piece is, when are we meeting again? Do we need to meet again? Who's taking the overall coordination? And how do we stay in touch, which is really often the key next steps. So I'm wondering, and then of course there's the big celebration. And we often like to take a picture of the group in front of the wall, kind of like just like this group did, because as you are typing up and capturing all the work that's been done, it's really important to take pictures to kind of remind people of the various steps along the way, but also for those who weren't there, for them to get a sense of, you know, wow, that was a lot of interesting work that went into this, and a lot of colorful visuals, and here's the work. So it isn't just this terribly dry process, even though Jennifer talked about putting it into an Excel sheet, and I've done that as well. It's nice to throw some pictures in there as well, so the group can see it. So any questions? Any questions, or I just want to say any comments that come to mind about the process itself? Or anything that I said that confused you, or you want to know more?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay,
Everybody's
thanks.
got it, I guess.
I hope so. Oh, well, of course they've got it, because they came to that wonderful training. Okay, Deb, I'm going to turn it to you.
All right. Well, what we'd like to do in the time we have left is give you the opportunity, if there are any general conundrums that you've been working with facilitation, designs coming up, questions that you might have that have been lingering from the training that you had. So I'd like to plant that seed in your brain for just a minute and give you a chance to think about it. But first of all, I'd like to ask if anyone, after this review or something that you've been working on, is there an application that you are thinking of you could use this process for in the next couple of months? Where do you see opportunity to apply this in your own work? Who has an example that they might be willing to share?
And I think, Deb, I'm going to turn the recording off at this time so people can speak freely.